I never thought my high school years would leave me with a memory so horrifying, so vivid, that even now as an adult, I can't walk into a dark room without feeling a knot in my stomach. It's one of those stories that's hard to believe unless you were there, and I was there. It started during my junior year at Ridgeview High School. Our school was your typical suburban institution, long, sterile hallways, buzzing fluorescent lights, and teachers who seemed to age in dog years. But there was one part of the school everyone whispered about: the old gym and its adjacent locker room. The old gym hadn't been used in years. It was built in the 1950s and shut down in the early 2000s after the new athletic complex was completed. Officially, it was condemned, unsafe due to structural issues. Unofficially, it was haunted. Students swapped stories about shadows moving across the windows or strange sounds echoing from within. I always thought it was just urban legend nonsense, until I had my own experience. It all started when Coach Miller decided to punish our basketball team for losing a big game. We had to clean up the old gym as part of our punishment. He said it would build character, but I think he just wanted to save money on janitors. I wasn't thrilled. No one was. The place was creepy enough from the outside: peeling paint, boarded up windows, and vines snaking up the brick walls. "Don't touch anything you don't have to," Coach said as he handed us gloves and garbage bags. "The place has got more dust than your grandma's attic." We were a group of 6. Me, Jake, Marcus, Tyler, Chris, and Liam. We walked into the old gym, the air immediately heavier, staler. It smelled of mildew and something metallic, like rust. The wooden floor was warped, and the bleachers looked like they'd collapse if you sneezed too hard. The light from our flashlights barely pierced the thick shadows. "Man, this place is a dump," Jake muttered, kicking an old soda can across the floor. "I can't believe Coach is making us do this," Marcus added, his voice echoing eerily. "This is probably illegal." We spent the first hour sweeping debris and tossing out broken furniture. That's when Liam found the door to the locker room. "Yo, check this out," he called, pointing his flashlight at a rusted metal door. The paint was chipped, revealing patches of orange-brown beneath. Above the door, faded letters spelled out, "Boys' Locker Room." "Think we're supposed to clean in there?" Tyler asked. "I mean, why not?" Jake said with a shrug. "Coach didn't say not to." I didn't like the idea, but I didn't want to look scared in front of my friends. So, we pried the door open. The hinges groaned loudly, the sound reverberating like a scream in the silence. Inside, the air was colder, damp, and heavy. Rows of rusted lockers lined the walls, their doors hanging ajar like yawning mouths. The tiled floor was slick with grime, and broken light fixtures dangled from the ceiling. "This place is straight out of a horror movie," Chris joked, but no one laughed. We split up to explore, our flashlights casting long, jittery shadows. That's when the strange things started happening. I was by myself, trying to move a broken bench when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It was faint, almost drowned out by the sound of my own breathing. I froze, straining to hear. Tap, tap, tap. "Guys," I called, my voice shaky. No one answered. I followed the sound, my heart hammering in my chest. It led me to a row of lockers near the back of the room. As I approached, the tapping stopped. My flashlight beam trembled as I scanned the lockers. One of the doors was slightly ajar. Against my better judgment, I reached out and pulled it open. Nothing, just empty metal and the smell of rust. I let out a shaky laugh, trying to calm my nerves. But then I noticed something strange, scratch marks on the inside of the locker door, as if someone had been clawing to get out. "Hey, what are you doing back there?" Jake's voice startled me, and I spun around to see him and Marcus approaching. "I heard something," I said, trying not to sound as freaked out as I felt. "Yeah, this place is creepy," Marcus said, looking around. "Let's just finish up and get out of here." We regrouped and decided to tackle the lockers together. That's when Tyler found the old journal. It was tucked away in the corner, buried under a pile of debris. The cover was leather, cracked and faded, with no title. He flipped it open and the pages were filled with messy handwriting, the ink smudged and faded. "What is this?" he asked, holding it up. "Looks like someone's diary," Chris said, peering over his shoulder. We skimmed through it, reading snippets aloud. It belonged to a student named Eric, who had attended Ridgeview in the late 70s. Most of the entries were mundane complaints about classes, crushes, basketball practice. But then the tone shifted. One entry caught my eye. October 12th, 1978. Something's wrong. I've been hearing things in the locker room. Whispers, tapping. No one believes me. I'm not crazy. I know what I heard. Another read. October 20th, 1978. I saw it. A shadow, but it wasn't mine. It moved even when I stood still. I'm scared. I don't think I'm alone in here. The last entry was the worst. October 31st, 1978. It's in the locker. I can hear it breathing. I'm going to lock it inside. If anyone finds this, don't open locker 119. We all exchanged uneasy glances. Locker 119. Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. We scanned the rows, our flashlights bouncing off the rusted metal. Then we saw it, locker 119, its door slightly ajar, just like in the diary. None of us wanted to go near it, but curiosity got the better of us. "This is stupid," Marcus said. "It's just a story." "Then open it," Tyler challenged. Marcus hesitated, then stepped forward. He grabbed the handle and yanked it open. The locker was empty at first glance. Then the smell hit us, a foul, rotting stench that made my stomach churn. Inside, scratched into the metal, were the words, "Let Emmy out." Before anyone could react, the door slammed shut on its own. The sound echoed like a gunshot, and the lights on our flashlights flickered. That's when the whispering started. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves. Then it grew louder, overlapping voices that seemed to come from all around us. My heart raced as I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing across the room. Shadows shifted and stretched, shapes that didn't match anything solid. "We need to get out of here," Chris said, his voice trembling. We bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like something was holding it shut. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening roar. I could barely hear my own panicked breathing. Then the lockers began to rattle, their doors slamming open and shut as if caught in an invisible wind. We huddled together, shouting over the noise, but our voices were swallowed by the cacophony. And then it stopped. Everything went silent. The door creaked open on its own, revealing the gym beyond. Without a second thought, we ran. We didn't stop until we were outside, gasping for air under the cold night sky. Coach Miller never asked us to go back, and none of us volunteered. We didn't tell anyone what happened. Who would believe us? But we all knew one thing: we weren't alone in that locker room. Something was there, something that had been waiting. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that it followed us out. High school is supposed to be a place for learning, growth, and a bit of harmless drama. But for me, Ridgeview High became a place of nightmares one fateful week during my senior year. It started with a substitute teacher, a peculiar, almost otherworldly man who appeared out of nowhere. Our regular history teacher, Mr. Thompson, had fallen ill unexpectedly, and in his place was a man who introduced himself as Mr. Graves. From the moment he walked into the room, the atmosphere changed. He was tall and gaunt, with hollow cheeks and piercing gray eyes that seemed to see straight through you. His voice was low and gravelly, with an unsettling calmness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Good morning, class," he said, his gaze sweeping over us. "I'll be your substitute teacher for the week. Let's begin." At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He handed out worksheets, lectured on the Industrial Revolution, and kept the classroom orderly. But there was something off about him. He had a way of knowing things he shouldn't. For instance, he'd call on students by name without ever looking at the seating chart. And not just their first names, he knew their full names, their middle names, even nicknames only their close friends used. "How does he know that?" my friend Amy whispered to me during class. I had no answer. By the third day, things took a darker turn. It started with the questions. Mr. Graves would pose riddles to the class, strange ones that had no clear answer. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? He asked, his gray eyes locking onto mine. I froze. It was a question I'd heard before, but something about the way he asked it sent a chill down my spine. It's a man, I stammered, crawling as a baby, walking as an adult, and using a cane in old age. He gave a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Very good, but let's see if you can answer this one. Then he asked another and another, each more cryptic and unsettling than the last. No one could answer them all, and every time someone failed, he'd tilt his head slightly, as if studying them. Curious, he'd mutter under his breath, his lips curling into a smirk. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his riddles in my head, trying to make sense of them. I wasn't the only one. The next day, Amy came to school looking as tired as I felt. I had the worst nightmares, she said. They were about him. Same, I admitted. What was yours about? She hesitated, her face pale. I was in the classroom, alone. The lights were flickering, and he was standing at the front, just staring at me. Then he started laughing, but it didn't sound human. It sounded wrong. I shuddered. Let's just get through today and hope he's gone by next week. But Mr. Graves wasn't gone. If anything, his behavior grew more bizarre. He'd randomly stop in the middle of a lecture and stare out the window, as if he could see something we couldn't. Sometimes he'd pause and sniff the air, his expression unreadable. On Friday, everything came to a head. When we walked into the classroom, the desks were arranged differently, forming a perfect circle. Mr. Graves stood in the center, his hands clasped behind his back. Take your seats, he instructed, his voice colder than ever. We exchanged nervous glances but obeyed. Once we were seated, he began to speak. Today we're going to play a game, he said, pacing slowly around the circle. A game of truth and consequence. What kind of game? Tyler, the class clown, asked, trying to sound brave. Mr. Graves stopped behind him, placing a bony hand on his shoulder. The kind where you don't lie, he said softly, because if you do, there will be consequences. The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then he began asking questions, starting with the person to his left. The questions were deeply personal, things no teacher should know to ask. Have you ever cheated on a test? Have you lied to your parents? Do you harbor hatred in your heart? Each student answered, their voices shaky, and each time someone hesitated or tried to deflect, the lights flickered and a low, guttural sound echoed through the room, a sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. When it was my turn, my palms were sweating. He fixed his eyes on me and asked, "Do you fear the truth?" I swallowed hard. "And no." "Good," he said, his lips curling into that unsettling smile, "because the truth always finds you." By the time he'd made his way around the circle, half the class was in tears. Then, without warning, he clapped his hands. "Well done, everyone," he said cheerfully. "You're free to go." We didn't need to be told twice. We practically ran out of the classroom, desperate to escape his presence. But as I reached the door, I glanced back. Mr. Graves was standing in the center of the room, staring at me with those piercing gray eyes. And then he spoke, though his lips didn't move. "We'll meet again." I stumbled out into the hallway, my heart pounding. When I turned to tell Amy what had happened, she was gone. The next week, Mr. Thompson returned, looking pale and drawn. When I asked him about Mr. Graves, he frowned. "Graves?" he repeated. I didn't request a substitute by that name. I never saw Mr. Graves again, but sometimes in the dead of night, I hear his voice in my dreams, asking riddles I'll never understand. And I know, deep down, that he's still out there, watching, waiting for the next classroom to haunt. They say every high school has its secrets, a scandalous affair, an unsolved mystery, or a creepy urban legend passed down from senior to freshman. At Pinecrest High, the most infamous tale was about the yearbook photos. It started decades ago, long before I was a student there. Every few years, someone would notice an extra face in the senior class photo. It wouldn't be a teacher or a student anyone recognized. Just a pale, expressionless figure standing somewhere in the background. They called it the forgotten face. Most people laughed it off as a prank Photoshop, someone sneaking into the shot, or just a trick of the light. But when I was a senior, I learned the truth. And now, I'm telling you so you won't make the same mistake I did. It was the fall of my senior year when the yearbook staff began taking the group photos for each grade. I was part of the student council, so I had to stay late to help organize the sessions. That's when I met Mr. Harlan, the school's longtime yearbook advisor. He was a wiry, nervous man with thick glasses and the habit of wringing his hands whenever he spoke. "Whatever you do," he said, pulling me aside one afternoon, "be careful when reviewing the senior photos." I laughed, thinking he was joking. Careful about what? He looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "If you see anything unusual, anything that doesn't belong, don't acknowledge. Just move on." I thought he was crazy, but I nodded to appease him. The first few sessions went smoothly. The freshman and sophomore class photos were uneventful, and the juniors were rowdy but manageable. But when it came time for the senior photo, things started to feel off. The shoot was scheduled for late afternoon in the gym. The bleachers were pulled out, and the students were arranged by height. As we tried to wrangle everyone into place, I noticed the lighting seemed dimmer than usual, even with the overhead lights on full blast. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive. "All right, everyone smile," the photographer called out. The camera clicked, capturing shot after shot as we shuffled people around to get the perfect angle. It wasn't until the next day, when I was helping review the proofs, that I saw it. There, in the back row of the senior photo, was a face I didn't recognize. It was a boy, maybe 17 or 18, with pale skin and hollow eyes. His expression was blank, almost like he was bored. He wore a suit that looked old-fashioned, and his hair was slicked back, like something out of a 1950s prom. "Who's this?" I asked the photographer, pointing at the screen. He frowned and leaned closer. "I don't know. Was he there yesterday?" "I didn't see him," I said. We called over Mr. Harlan, who turned pale the moment he saw the photo. "Delete it," he said, his voice shaking. "Now." "What? Why?" "Just do it," he snapped, his usual nervousness replaced by an edge of panic. The photographer hesitated but eventually complied, erasing the file. I thought that would be the end of it, but I couldn't shake the image of that boy's face. That night I dreamed about him. In the dream, I was back in the gym, standing alone in the dim light. The bleachers were empty, except for him. He was sitting in the middle row, staring at me with those hollow eyes. "Who are you?" I asked. He didn't respond. Instead, he stood up and began walking toward me, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. I tried to move, to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Just as he reached me, I woke up, drenched in sweat. The next day, I couldn't focus in class. I told myself it was just a dream, but when I walked into the yearbook office, I froze. On the wall was a printout of the senior photo, the one we had deleted. And there he was, still standing in the back row. "What the hell?" I whispered. Mr. Harlan walked in and saw me staring at the photo. His face went pale. "I told you not to acknowledge it," he said. "I thought you deleted this." "I did. It doesn't matter. He always comes back." "Who is he?" I demanded. Mr. Harlan sighed, rubbing his temples. "No one knows for sure. Some say he's the ghost of a student who died decades ago, before yearbook photos were digital. Others think he's something older, something that's been tied to this school for a long time. All I know is he appears every few years in the senior photo. And anyone who draws attention to him, they don't last long." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, don't last long?" "They disappear," he said grimly. "Sometimes they drop out, sometimes they move away, and sometimes..." He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the dreams got worse. Every night I'd see him closer, clearer, until I could see the faint outline of scars on his pale face. He never spoke, but his eyes said enough. "I see you. I'm coming for you." One morning I woke up to find a Polaroid photo on my nightstand. It was of me, standing in the gym with him in the background. My heart stopped. I hadn't taken that picture. I didn't even own a Polaroid camera. That was the final straw. I went to Mr. Harlan and told him everything. He listened quietly, his face grim. "There's only one way to end this," he said. We need to destroy the photo, the original. It's the only thing tying him here. We spent hours searching through the yearbook archives in the basement. Finally, we found it, a dusty black and white photo from 1953. There he was, standing in the back row, just as he had in ours. "This is it," Mr. Harlan said. He grabbed a lighter and set the photo on fire. As the flames consumed it, I felt a sudden weight lift off my chest. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. The nightmares stopped after that. When the yearbook was published, there was no sign of him in the senior photo. But sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of a pale face in the corner of a mirror or a shadow that doesn't belong. And I wonder if we really got rid of him, or if he's just waiting for his next photo op.